Welcome in. It's the Raw Prospect Podcast. Imy Nixon and Michael Ween, both coming to you from our respective universities. Myself at the University of Texas here in Austin. Imy from Bethany College in Kansas, where he is on the golf team.
Yep.
We haven't done an episode in a while. I believe our last episode was before the NBA playoffs started, or maybe during the first round. So it's been a long time since we were on, but we've been at school and we've been busy, and this was the first moment we could do it. So we're here now. Today we're going to be covering obviously the NBA, talking about the finals, especially our takeaways from the finals, from the Lakers' 17th championship in franchise history. Some other NBA playoff takeaways as well, along with talking some Jimmy Butler, where with his performance now leading the Heat to the finals, where does he rank amongst the NBA's best players? And then we'll jump into some football stuff. The NFL season has started, so we'll pick some games and we'll talk about the MVP race. So let's get started.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I'm excited for this. Okay, so you want to start with the finals?
Let's start by talking about the finals. First, just your general takeaways, and then we'll move into a discussion about Jimmy Butler. So go ahead.
Well, one of the main things that I was surprised about in the series is how good the Lakers bench was compared to the Miami bench. You saw later in the series, Miami had to go to an 8-man rotation, and the Lakers stayed at their 9-10-man rotation. That's a huge advantage. Being such a top-heavy team, being able to go to your bench guys and being able to rely on them to hit shots and be productive, that's huge. And also, the Miami Heat's game plan, I think they were banking on the Lakers not being able to shoot the three-point shot and guarding the lane. And what ended up happening was the Lakers shot exponentially better than they did throughout the entire regular season. I think the numbers, it was like 4 or 5 percentage points higher than the regular season numbers. Just crazy stuff. They were leaving guys open, and the Lakers were able to make them pay. So that's a main reason they won the series for me, other than obviously LeBron and AD.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, let's congratulate the Miami Heat. What an incredible run to even get to this point, as young as a team as they are, with young stars like Duncan Robinson and especially Tyler Hero and Bam Adebayo. All great players, all super young, led by Jimmy Butler, who we'll definitely talk about coming up here in a moment. But, I mean, my biggest takeaways, first of all, LeBron's still the best player on the planet when it matters most. You talk about, he's in his 17th season and he still has that unprecedented combination of size, speed, feel for the game, athleticism, basketball IQ. And coming down the stretch, he was the best player in almost all of those games, especially in Game 6. Now, he didn't just win his 4th championship. He did it as the best player in the series. And you just watch him do what he does. It's incredible. It is absolutely incredible. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about Jimmy Butler, but he's my next takeaway. His Game 3 and his Game 5 triple-double performances will go down as some of the best performances in NBA Finals history. I mean, we're talking about that 40-point triple-double that he had to lead the Heat to a victory in, what was that, Game 3? And then to do it again with a 30-point triple-double in Game 5 to stave off elimination for another night. His performance overall was great, but those two performances were incredible and will go down in history as two of the best finals performances ever. But I think if you just want to talk about what won the series, to me, it was the Lakers' ability, and this is where they had been dangerous all year, the Lakers' ability to turn defense into offense. That's where they're lethal, is in the fast break. And they started to turn the Heat over. I mean, you're talking about some of the adjustments that Frank Vogel made throughout the series, replacing Dwight Howard with Alex Caruso, to mixing up these lineups to get more speed and athleticism on the floor. Anthony Davis's defense in the series was incredible as well. Eventually, the Lakers' two best players, Davis and James, two of the top 5 players in the NBA, won out, and they were able to make the necessary adjustments to force Miami into bad decisions offensively, and they were able to turn those into fast break points. And that's when the Lakers are the most lethal. So that's overall my take. Just going basically off the top of my head. Congratulations to LeBron on his 4th ring. Absolutely incredible. Congratulations to Anthony Davis on winning his 1st ring, something that will help his legacy for sure. And then an amazing job by Pat Riley, the Miami Heat organization, Eric Spoelstra, and all their young players, along with Jimmy Butler, to even get to this point. They should hang their heads higher. So that's my take.
Yeah. It's really just, for Miami, like, you can't leave this series with your head down at all. Like, you have a bright future. You have all these young players that completely balled out the entire playoffs. That's going to be so instrumental for the rest of their career, especially Tyler Hero. I think he has the ability to become a lethal scoring, a la like a Devin Booker, someone of that nature who just has a lethal shooting touch and ability to just score off the dribble. I think he can become that. But back to the Lakers, though, just when they put Anthony Davis at the 5, his defensive versatility showed, and it completely threw the Heat off, for the rest of the series. After Game 4, I believe, they put Anthony Davis at the 5, and you saw that the Heat weren't able, other than Jimmy Butler's attacks, they weren't able to get to the basket as well. And Bam Adebayo wasn't able to make those tough layups over Anthony Davis at all. He took him out of the series, basically.
I want to go back to one of the points you made about Miami hanging their heads, or coming out of this series with their, chin up.
The positive outlook.
Heads high, positive outlook. You have to look at the fact that also Goran Dragic didn't play at all in this series. And Bam Adebayo, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, missed the first 2 games.
Right.
So, if those players had been healthy, could we be talking about a potentially different story here? I mean, I still think the Lakers probably would have won if those players would have played, but we could be talking about, a potential 7-game series. Because what Dragic did, his impact throughout the playoffs was probably one of the biggest reasons the Heat even got to this point.
Right.
So, his ability to spark them offensively when they were struggling, to get to the rim, finish in the paint, to knock down important shots when needed most. He was one of the most integral parts of this finals run. So you have to take into account the fact that the Lakers came into the series completely healthy and relatively, well rested, while the Heat had some unfortunate breaks there at the end with health and injuries. So also take that into account if you are a Heat fan.
Right. And one of the most impressive things I think I've ever seen, as a basketball fan in my life, was seeing Jimmy Butler overcome that 40-point game that LeBron had and still close, running on fumes. I feel like,
oh yeah,
I'm not going to compare him to Michael Jordan, obviously, but I feel like that must have been how it felt like to watch Michael Jordan just willing his team to victory.
Right.
They at that point where they were down by 3 or 4, I believe. The Lakers had gone on a run. There was 3 minutes left in that game 5. Yeah, game 5. And then Jimmy Butler immediately turned it on again and just took over the game by getting to the free throw line and creating buckets. And I'll never forget that. I have so much more respect now for Jimmy Butler. I honestly need to apologize to Jimmy Butler. I thought when he went to the Heat, I thought it was a joke. You said you wanted to win, but you go to the Heat, a team that didn't make the playoffs, a team that doesn't even have that much playoff experience overall. They're just a young team. So they were this good, just overall, in the regular season and everything. It's just a testament to how good he is as a player.
Yeah, and I guess that can kind of lead us into our discussion about Jimmy Butler. I also gained a lot of respect for him as a player as well. Not only for what he was able to do, especially in those 2 games, games 3 and game 5, where he had the 40-point triple-double and then the 30-point triple-double. But you talk about it, we're not comparing him, you made a good point, we're not comparing him to Michael Jordan, but what he did and the way he played in game 3, willing his team to victory, I believe he only rested in that game for 48 seconds. So less than a minute he was able to rest in that game. And to be able to go out there against 2 Goliaths, we're talking 2 of the top 5 best players in the game today, Anthony Davis and LeBron James. And the way that the Lakers were playing at the time, up in the series 2-0, with the potential to know that you might, if you don't win this, if you don't win these last 5 minutes, if you don't win this fourth quarter, you're down 3-0 in the NBA Finals and might end up getting swept. To do what he did was Jordan-esque. Again, not comparing him to Michael Jordan, but what he did in those 2 games and throughout the finals overall, it was Jordan-esque, just in his ability to, as you said, will his team to victory while playing tired as a dog. He was exhausted. I think one of the factors in that blowout Game 6 victory was Jimmy Butler was just gassed. He just ran out of gas, and understandably so. So, that's a great point. Now, I think our next discussion, we were going to plan to discuss after you saw what you saw. This season, pre-NBA bubble, when you watched the Heat, and then throughout throughout the bubble in the NBA playoffs, the NBA finals, from what you saw this year, where should Jimmy Butler rank amongst his NBA peers in terms of best players in the NBA going into next season, in your opinion?
Well, if you look at my list, I could see Jimmy Butler ranked as high as 5 or as low as 10, but I think he is for sure in the top 10. For sure in the top 10. I think you can make an argument that he's better than James Harden, better than Luka Doncic, better than Nikola Jokic, but it's so close that you really wouldn't be able to go wrong either way, which is why I have him all the way down at 8 or 9. If we just talk about the James Harden discussion, if we go down the list, James Harden, you could argue that Jimmy Butler is a better leader than James Harden, and Jimmy Butler, just his mindset, elevates him to a little bit higher than James Harden in big moments, even though he's not as talented of a player. Obviously, James Harden is the better scorer, and he's had a better track record in terms of leading teams consistently, like year in and year out. I think that's what gives him the edge for me, because of his track record and how good he's been for years and years and years. And for Jimmy Butler, I think like his intensity is so high that it wouldn't work on most teams. And I think that matters. Like his intensity isn't necessarily a bad thing, but some organizations just can't handle that. It rubs them the wrong way. And you saw that in Minnesota. You saw that in Chicago. You saw that in Philadelphia. So I think that's an interesting conversation, but I think I'd give that edge to James Harden.
I definitely agree with you. I think I would rank him. I don't have my list totally written out, but I can kind of name it off the top of my head generally, in a general order. I think I'd have to rank him pretty similar to you, probably in that 9 to 10 slot. I think he deserves to be in the top 10 for sure. I think when you go down the list, I mean, it's LeBron, then it's Kawhi, then it's Giannis, then it's Anthony Davis, Harden, Doncic, Lillard, Jokic. You have to put Jokic in there. Then, I mean, you get to players like, I don't know, Embiid, guys like that are sort of inconsistent. You can make arguments. Again, that's just going off the top of my head. But based on what I saw this year and the amount of respect I earned for Jimmy Butler, just based off the amount of mental toughness he showed in those throughout the playoffs and in those finals games, as we talked about, and the numbers he put up on good efficiency. I mean, the leadership quality, you talked about it. I mean, the Heat, I believe, one of the youngest teams in the NBA currently, with those young stars we need to acknowledge. Tyler Hero, what an incredible performance at the age of 20. I mean, the kid hasn't even turned 21 yet. He's not even allowed to, drink legally yet. And he put on incredible performances throughout the playoffs. We're talking about Duncan Robinson, who knocked down big shots consistently, who's only 23 or 24 years old. We're talking about Bam Adebayo, another young player who played college ball with Tyler Hero. I mean, these players are young and had no previous playoff experience, and just Butler's ability to lead while putting up good numbers on great efficiency, and the fact he was doing everything he could, doing everything in his power, giving everything he had, leaving everything on the floor, displaying that mental toughness. Just the amount of respect I gained for him is enough for me to put him in the top 10 players.
Right.
So
it's just it's a tough conversation because it's 1 year of greatness, you know.
Yeah.
And you could argue that he was fantastic in Philadelphia, and he definitely was. He was fantastic in Philadelphia, but he also left that organization in bad blood, just like he left the last three. But one thing that I want to point out is Miami, their structure in their organization, I think, is top notch in the NBA.
I would agree.
Their culture that they have, they do the body fat test. They're basically a no BS organization. They won't settle for guys who won't put in the work. You saw that with Deion Waiters. They immediately cut him as soon as he had a mess up. He was gone. You know, so I think Jimmy Butler was able to recognize that cultural structure that they had, and he went there and he elevated it, and it was incredible to watch. It was unbelievable.
Now, I think that's a good argument that people can make against Jimmy Butler is that in the past, you know, when he went to Minnesota, some people say he was sort of like a locker room problem, a guy who, you know, didn't really lead well in that situation. Then he goes to Philadelphia, and that didn't really fizzle out the way we expected with the great amount of talent they had. But let's think about this. I mean, they're a lucky Kawhi shot away from maybe forcing overtime in that conference semifinal series and maybe even going to the conference finals last year when they faced Toronto. And we don't know what would have happened in that Game 7, but it's totally possible that if that Kawhi shot doesn't go in and the Sixers win in overtime, that they could have beaten Toronto in that Game 7 and gone to the conference finals with a chance to get to the NBA Finals. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but just think about that in the back of your mind when you're thinking about what Jimmy Butler actually was able to accomplish in his time in his short time with Philadelphia. And then you want to talk about Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota has been bad for the past couple years, but I mean, they were sort of on a playoff bubble with Jimmy Butler on that team, and now they're top. They're one of the three worst teams in the NBA.
Right.
So I mean, to be able to elevate Minnesota to in playoff contention, but not there yet, and to be able to almost get Philadelphia to the conference finals, and to lead this young Heat team to the finals and put up a valiant effort with his team not totally healthy against probably the second greatest basketball player of all time. After this season, I mean, we're just talking about this season, but I think you'd have to put him in the top 10 regardless.
Right. Just a lock for the top 10. I mean, I think there's no way you can argue against that, because only a superstar player would be able to do what he did.
Right.
You know, so he is top tier no matter what. I mean, I had Paul George in my top 10 before this year, and like basically the opposite happened for him, and now I'm just left like confused on what type of player he is. But that's another topic for another day.
Okay, so I love the NBA, but you're probably even a bigger NBA fan than I am. So I want to give, since we haven't talked about NBA in a long time, probably since, I guess, before the playoffs even started, I want to give the NBA its fair share amount of time. We're 25 minutes in, so maybe 10 more minutes at the most, so we still save time for NFL. But is there anything else you want to discuss in terms of NBA? We've covered the finals, we've covered the Heat, we've covered the Lakers. But what about other things that you might want to cover? Have anything on your mind?
Well, in the conference finals, but let's just talk a little bit about what happened in those series. I think in the Western Conference Finals, I think if you look at Denver's team, they could easily come back next year and make the finals. I think they're in a really good position. I think if they let go of Paul Millsap, if he was to decline his player option and then get on a cheaper deal, a more team-friendly deal, I think that team with that core, if Jamal Murray is able to keep up that level of play, I think they could easily be in contention for the 1 seed and maybe make a run all the way next year. They have all the talent, and that's obviously barring whether Michael Porter Jr. will continue to improve. But I think he will. I think he definitely will.
I agree with that. I mean, the Denver Nuggets were probably the most entertaining team to watch in these NBA playoffs. You talk about the job that Mike Malone does year in, year out with that team. You have a top 10, you have an established, and we agree on this, an established top 10 player in Nikola Jokic, who although he's not he can sometimes be a liability defensively, he's probably the best creator, the best, how do I say this?
Initiator.
The best initiator of offense arguably in the NBA. You have Jamal Murray, a young player who I believe, no, he's not on it, who recently signed a big extension, who played incredible in these playoffs. I mean, we're talking about 50-point games, 50-point duels with Donovan Mitchell, the Game 7 performances where he got hot from 3 and couldn't miss, to constantly come up big in those 2 Game 7s. We're talking about a guy that didn't get much rest throughout the playoffs because Denver was going 7 games with Utah and other teams they faced, the Clippers. We're talking about another top 20, top 25 player to pair with Jokic, along with a budding star and a third option, which is what everyone says Denver needs, right? They're one piece away. That's Michael Porter Jr. I agree with you. He's gonna continue to improve in the offseason. I don't know how long the offseason is. I'm guessing the season will start sometime in January, if I had to guess.
I think MLK Day is supposed to be the target date.
Okay, so they'll give the players the adequate time they need off, and the season will start early next year. But that's not the point. The point is you have Michael Porter Jr., who's going to work hard this offseason to continue to improve his game. He's the third option you need. And then you have that bench. I mean, we're talking about a guy in Gary Harris, an important part of that team in the past, who was hurt for most of the bubble, and when he played, didn't even play up to his standards. So if he comes back healthy, and if he plays well as well, that's a tough team.
Another thing nobody's talking about is they were without Will Barton the entire bubble. So they're basically missing a starter in their lineup.
And I mean,
if he's there, then maybe they have a better chance in that series.
And to add to that, I mean, we're talking about a guy like Jeremy Grant, who was absolutely integral. I know I keep using that word, but I can't think of another word to use. Absolutely one of the most important parts of their run to the conference finals. I mean, they have lots of young talent, an established top 10 player, another established top 20, top 25 player who's going to continue to get better, a budding star with with skills and a frame like Kevin Durant. He's not Kevin Durant, but he has those type of skills and that type of frame. We're talking about a great trade they made to acquire Jimmy Grant. Talking about even players like the big off the bench. Mason Plumlee. Another important part. I mean, they are stacked. And for people who think that they potentially need to go out and sign someone this offseason and what's not really a relatively strong free agent class compared to past years, I don't know. I think I'd probably have to disagree with you. I think they should keep this band together and just continue to work, continue to develop that young talent in the offseason and hope that it comes back next season, because this team is definitely capable of competing for an NBA championship, and we saw it this year. So that's definitely a good thing to bring up. I think the Denver Nuggets, but I think we should talk about the team that a lot of people thought was going to end up in the finals, but the Denver Nuggets beat them in that 7-game series in the conference semis, and that's the Los Angeles Clippers. I want to get your thoughts on first, your thoughts on their overall performance and why they lost, and then second, letting go of Doc Rivers and hiring, elevating Tyronn Lue to the head coaching position.
No, I think what we didn't realize about this team is that chemistry matters. I think you had a bunch of really good players on that team, but I just don't think the talent meshed enough. I don't think they had a glue guy playmaker that could facilitate and make the offense work. I think the problem was their offense was too simplistic. I think they relied too much on Kawhi bailing them out and making a contested shot, PG bailing them out and making a contested shot, or just kicking it out into the shot clock and throwing up a three. Like, I think they need a actual system where they run plays and run something other than just pick and roll from time to time. They just need an actual structure to this offense. And then defensively, Montrezl Harrell didn't seem like he could find his rhythm at all during the entire bubble. It was baffling to me. And then in the Nugget series, he just straight up got exposed by Jokic. Jokic it was barbecue chicken. I think that's probably his worst matchup of the entire NBA. Jokic is probably his worst matchup. So it was just a combination of everything. Just a lack of structure offensively, and then their defense being really good, but not being able to keep up. Just when the other team would go on runs, they would have no answer.
Right. I agree with everything you said. Obviously, this was a team that a lot of people, including myself, thought would potentially reach the NBA Finals this season because of the way their current roster was constructed, with Kawhi and Paul George, and then all the other complementary pieces they have, the Patrick Beverleys of the world, the Montrezl Harrells of the world. other guys like Marcus Morris, a guy they brought in the offseason. I mean, we're talking about, or in that trade or whatever happened, we're talking about a team that a lot of people thought was going to be competing in at least the conference finals against the Lakers. And to be honest with you, they just fell apart. They got taken to a Game 7. Kawhi was off in that game. It happens. You don't always, unless you're Michael Jordan, you're not always. It's happened to James Harden in elimination games. It's happened to other great players. He was just off. And on top of that, Paul George wasn't able to step up in Kawhi's, absence in those critical elimination games. We're talking about Paul George that, was hitting the side of the backboard on some of his corner threes. Like, it just wasn't meant to be. That's unheard of from an all-star plus potential superstar. We're talking about a guy that was an MVP candidate at the beginning of last season in Oklahoma City. We're talking about that guy who was hitting the side, not even hitting the rim. Hitting the side of the backboard on some of his three. It just fell apart there at the end. And I don't know if it was fatigue potentially or just the fact that they weren't ready. I think the chemistry also played a part in it. This Nuggets team had played together last year in the playoffs, so they had some experience and they knew kind of what to expect, and they were playing in those Game 7s against the Spurs and the Trailblazers in hostile environments on the road in Portland, one of the hardest places to win in the NBA, one of the loudest arena.
I think that one was actually in Denver.
Was it?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, wherever it was.
Sorry. The point still stands. Keep going.
The point still stands. They had experience in Game 7s, and the Clippers, this is the first year that this team was constructed as it is. And they didn't get, with injuries and all, they didn't get a whole lot of time to play with their entire roster healthy. And as you mentioned, that chemistry played a part coming down the stretch. Denver knew what to expect in Game 7. And, of course, a couple players on the Clippers did. But, when it comes down to it, you need your whole entire team in order to win those games. And it just fell apart. So I think we need to move on because it's now been 37 minutes and we need to get to some NFL stuff. But a great discussion on NBA. It was great to get to discuss the NBA Finals. Again, congratulations to the Lakers, tying the Celtics for most NBA championships now with 17 titles. Absolutely amazing. Congratulations to all their players, including LeBron and Anthony Davis. Rajon Rondo, an incredible story, winning titles with both the Celtics and the Lakers, the only player to ever do that in the storied history. Yeah, Dwight Howard getting his first ring. We're talking about a lot. Congratulations to a young team in the Heat who will definitely be back competing next year. And just an overall great conversation to wrap up this NBA season. So with that, we'll move on to football. Football season is back. The NFL season has made it through 5 weeks. No bubble. There has been a couple cases of COVID, and they've had to reschedule some games. But so far, we're making it through. So let's go ahead and let's just go ahead and start with this. We've talked about this on prior podcasts. The MVP, we talk about it all the time. Who's the favorite for MVP at this point in the season? We do it all the time. We do these awards and stuff on previous episodes. So let's just dive in. We're 5 weeks into the season, a little over a quarter of the way through. Who is the MVP at this point in time in your mind?
I think it's undoubtedly Russell Wilson. I think it's close, but it's also not close. I mean, you could give it to Aaron Rodgers. Like, I wouldn't be mad at that. But I think what Russell Wilson is doing with a defense that's subpar, and that's being nice, and an offensive line where some games where he's just running for his life. This team is not outside of their weapons. Like, their receiving core is great. Outside of their weapons and Russell Wilson, this team is not that good. And for them to be undefeated at this point in the season is just unbelievable to me.
I totally agree. We've talked about the fact that it's absolutely blasphemous that Russell Wilson, to this point in his career, in his ninth season in the league, for what he's done for the Seattle Seahawks, who, as you mentioned, have bottom 10 offensive lines year in and year out. And not the greatest of weapons. They have decent weapons, but not the greatest of weapons. We can all agree on that. For what he has done to this point, and hasn't even gotten a vote for MVP. But I think that changes this year, and I think he's going to win the award. There's no doubt he is the favorite at this point in the season. Let's look at his stats, and I know it's a small sample size through 5 games, but let's compare his stats and his numbers to the past 2 MVPs, right? 2 guys we absolutely rave about. Lamar Jackson, who won last year's MVP, and then Patrick Mahomes, who won the 2018 MVP with that record-setting season, right? Patrick Mahomes in 2018. The Chiefs started 5-0. Great team, right? Good coach. We all expect that. Completed 63% of his passes, 14 touchdowns, 2 picks, 1,500 yards. On his way to throwing for 50-plus touchdowns and leading his team to the AFC Championship that year, where they eventually lost to the Patriots because of a offside call, right? Could have potentially won that game and been to 2 straight Super Bowls, okay? We rave about Patrick Mahomes. Most say he's the best quarterback in the NFL. Those were his stats through 5 games in that MVP season. Let's go to last year. Lamar Jackson, 3-2 win-loss. Now, they lost twice early in the year, but didn't lose again until the playoffs. And that's another story for another day, is his performance in the playoffs. But 3-2, 65% completion percentage, 1,200 yards passing, 11 touchdowns, 1 pick. So, very good numbers. On his way to a 36 touchdown season in the MVP, leading the Ravens to a 14-2 regular season record and a playoff berth, right? Russell Wilson this year, 5-0 win-loss, 73% completion percentage, throwing for over 1,500 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. With a worse offensive line, a historically bad defense. Like, this defense is historically bad in terms of the amount of yards and points they are giving up. Look at it. I mean, Russell's better in completion percentage. He's better in yards. He's better in touchdowns. And he's thrown 2 more picks, but 2 of those picks can be blamed on other things, like the receivers. It's incredible what he's doing. He leads the NFL in touchdown passes, and he ranks 3rd in both completion percentage and passing yards up to this point in the season. There's no question in my mind that this will continue. The Seahawks will be, they'll finish as a top 3 team in the NFC, get a playoff berth, probably go at least to the NFC Championship. At this particular point in time, the way they're playing, I think is good enough to get there. And with the way he's playing, he could potentially carry them to a Super Bowl. Now, Green Bay is another story, and we'll talk about them a little later when we make our picks. Because Aaron Rodgers is also playing one of the best seasons of his career to this point.
Right.
A 4-0 win-loss. He's leading what ranks as the best offense in the league in terms of points per game. A 70% completion percentage, 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns, and hasn't thrown a pick yet through 5 games. So he's a close second. But I think Russell Wilson's going to run away with this award. It's his to lose at this point. I mean, the fact that he hasn't even gotten a vote, and I won't harp on this anymore, is just, I don't even have the words for it. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Put it that way. So
I read a story that Chris Collinsworth one year, he was going to get his vote in. He was going to vote for Russell Wilson, but he wasn't able to get his vote in time.
Interesting. I haven't heard that story.
Right?
That's interesting.
But yeah, not that relevant, but kind of funny.
So
okay,
it is funny.
Let's get into these. Games.
Hold on. Before we do that, I wanted to just real quick touch on, since we're talking about quarterbacks. You know, MVP is mainly a quarterback award, right? Occasionally, it's won by a running back or another position, but most of the time, it's a quarterback award. Let's talk about these 2 new quarterbacks that we have, the 2 new rookies that we've seen play. We haven't seen Tua play yet, but we have seen Justin Herbert and we have seen Joe Burrow. Real quick, it doesn't have to be a long discussion, but let's just touch on which rookie quarterback to you has been more impressive to this point in the season, Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert?
Well, my expectations for Justin Herbert were much lower, I'll tell you. I was not high on Justin Herbert coming out of Oregon. To be honest, he didn't have to make many throws into tight windows, and just based off of the scheme. So I think that hid a lot of his talents rather than hid his flaws, which is where I was wrong. I think his ability to be calm in the pocket, that's probably the biggest thing that I underrated from him. At Oregon, he had such a great offensive line. He was rarely under duress, and he rarely had to move around the pocket. So I completely wrote off that ability in his game, and that's probably one of his best traits, other than his arm talent. And he's been really, really good so far. He's gone into a system with the Chargers. Their defense is solid. Their receivers are pretty good. He's gone into a great situation, and I think it ended up being the perfect fit for him. I think if he ended up in Washington or with Detroit, I think that might not have been the case.
I agree. Joe Burrow has looked great for what he has, for what he's working with down there in Cincinnati. He's looked absolutely fantastic. I believe he's one of the best statistically in terms of throwing those intermediate throws, 10 to 15 to 20 yards down the field. He's great and all, but I think the more impressive performance to this point has been Justin Herbert. Just a little rant here. Justin Herbert to this point in the season, 69% completion percentage, about 1,200 yards passing, 9 touchdowns to 3 picks, in addition to a rushing touchdown. Now, this year, let's compare him to a guy everyone raves about, and he's not Lamar Jackson. But just listen to this. To this point, last year's MVP, right? With a better team, better situation. This point in the season, Lamar is 4-1, win-loss, completion percentage of 63%, 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, 3 picks. So to this point in the season, Justin Herbert is basically the same as Lamar Jackson. The only difference is
Less game.
Lamar's in a better situation and has won 4 games, and Herbert is stuck on the Chargers, who seem down the stretch of games to not be able to convert and close games because of special teams and other things, right? So, I mean, Lamar Jackson's great. I'm not saying he's not. But we're talking about Herbert. Statistically, he's putting up numbers with guys that we rank in the top 5 of the league. I mean, this guy, just when you watch him, we don't even have to talk about stats. The arm, the throws that he's making, the strength, the ability. He's not the most mobile, but he's definitely, you're able to move out the pocket with him, do those bootlegs, do those play-action passes. He's a lot more accurate than I thought he would be. He's been missing a couple key pieces on that offense. I know Austin Eckler has missed a couple games due to injury. Mike Williams has been out occasionally, although he had a big week last week against the Saints. I mean, these are important pieces to that offense, and Herbert's doing a great job. And the last thing I'll say, I mean, they asked him right before that Kansas City game, I guess something happened with Tyrod Taylor. I don't really understand what happened with that, but they basically said, okay, Justin Herbert, you're going to play Patrick Mahomes in your first game of your NFL career on the road in Kansas City. Go out there and get him. And he had the lead in the second half of that game. He's had second half leads on Kansas City, Tampa Bay, and New Orleans. We're talking about Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, and Drew Brees. That's 2 of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, future first ballot Hall of Famers, and probably a young stud who's going to go on to be a first ballot Hall of Famer. So, I mean, he's had second half leads on all of those guys in 3 of the first 4 games he's played up to this point. And, you know, the fact that they haven't been able to close those games is a different discussion for another day. But, I mean, just going off that, I think you'd have to give it to Justin Herbert. But Joe Burrow, don't get us wrong, has been fantastic. I think he's definitely, Cincinnati has found themselves a franchise quarterback for the future. And I think the Chargers may have a young star here in Justin Herbert, something that I don't think either of us, when we were doing our draft coverage for this season, thought would happen. So, congratulations to both franchises on finding young, good, franchise-caliber quarterbacks. So with that, we'll conclude our podcast. We're going to make picks against the spread for 6 games for Week 6. And we'll start with the Steelers and the Browns. You can go first.
Okay, so this game, the key matchup is Cleveland's running game against the Steelers' front 7. The Steelers have probably the best front 7 in the NFL, and the Cleveland Browns, up to this point, they've had the most yards per carry in the NFL. And that being able to run that play action is what's been able to give Baker Mayfield that time to throw that he needs to process the coverage. And so if Pittsburgh can stuff that running game, they'll be able to speed up Baker Mayfield's clock and force him into some mistakes. And I think that's what's ultimately going to happen. I think Pittsburgh's going to win and cover the spread. And it'll be a lower scoring game than most people would think. I'm going to pick Pittsburgh to win 27-21.
Cool. Obviously, I'm a Steelers fan, but I'm going to pick Pittsburgh, laying 3.5 points at home to Cleveland for a couple reasons. First of all, the last time the Browns won in Pittsburgh, I was 3 years old. So that was, 16 years ago. So
17 years ago.
almost 17 years ago. Yep. So that's the first thing. Second of all, the Browns aren't totally healthy coming into this game, and I know the Steelers are dealing with some injuries as well. But we're talking about Baker Mayfield. They're saying he will play, but he's dealing with a rib issue that could knock him out at any time. I think Jarvis Landry has been dealing with some bumps and bruises, a hip problem, a rib problem, according to what I'm reading here. Odell Beckham apparently has an illness that he's dealing with, but it's luckily not COVID-19 related. Even Kareem Hunt, I think, is banged up when I looked at their injury report. So that's another reason. Cleveland's not totally healthy. I think, in addition, Mayfield, in his young career, he's 0-4 in his NFL career against the spread versus teams that are at least 4 games above 500. The Steelers are one of those teams. It's on the road. I think Pittsburgh, it will be close up until about the fourth quarter, and that Steelers pass rush will start to get home. I don't think the Browns are going to be able to run the football. The Steelers rank second in run defense. I think they're going to be able to slow down Kareem Hunt and not allow him to get any of those explosive runs. I think the one last week that Miles Sanders had was an outlier for the Steelers defense. It's not often that you're able to trick or catch the Steelers defense as aggressive as they are in that front seven, and a wrong coverage or a wrong play like that to break out on those big runs. And I think Cleveland's going to need one of those to win this game, but I don't think they're going to get it. I think they're going to force Mayfield to throw the ball, and you saw it last week if you watched the Eagles game. The game was close late, but when they needed to most, the Pittsburgh pass rush got to Carson Wentz and got some critical turnovers and sacks that they needed to win that game. And then lastly, I'll just say this. I think Pittsburgh's offense is starting to find a rhythm, and they now have that big play capability with a guy with the size and speed and the skills, the likes of a Chase Claypool. I think possibly, and I'm saying this because of the history of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the success that they've had drafting wide receivers in the past, especially in the past decade, a young star may have been born last Sunday in Chase Claypool. This guy is legit. I think he can be, if he continues to develop like this, he can be a legit number one receiver with his size and his skills. So we're talking about a young, talented receiving core. Roethlisberger's playing well. He's not turning the ball over. He looks fine in terms of his health. So I think, I know I'm going on a rant here, but Pittsburgh is my favorite team, so I can sometimes go on tangents. But, I'm laying the points. Pittsburgh -3.5. I'll take them to win. I'm going to say 31-21 at home against the Cleveland Browns, who I do think, even though they lose this game, will be in the playoffs this season. That is crazy to say, but I think the Cleveland Browns will be in the playoffs this season. I think Kevin Stefanski was the right hire. But with that...
I think too. And on the bright side for Cleveland, at least you won't have to fire your coach this time after you lose to Pittsburgh.
Yeah, that's right. Now, hopefully, we don't run in, and I know we're just having a little fun and making some jokes here, but hopefully we don't run in to another Myles Garrett situation where he takes off Ben's helmet and smacks him in the head. But, that's a whole nother situation. Hopefully that doesn't happen. Okay, let's move on. The second game we're going to pick, the Tennessee Titans and the Houston Texans.
This game is a really tough matchup for Houston. I think you saw Brandon Cooks come on last week against the Jags. That definitely gives the Houston fans some hope that their receiving core can get going a little bit. And obviously they still have Will Fuller, but defensively, I think that's where the problem lies. Up until that Jacksonville game, the Houston defense was historically bad against the run. And as we know, the Tennessee Titans have a guy named Derrick Henry, and he's a tank. And
oh,
Henry go for like 200 yards, at least.
Yeah,
start him in fantasy.
I think Tennessee, you can argue up to this point, and I know they've had that whole disastrous COVID outbreak, and who's to blame for that, I don't know. But what they did to Buffalo on Tuesday night was just reaffirmed to me. I think you can argue they're top 3 team in the AFC.
Right.
Tannehill's playing at an elite level. If you just look at his statistics, we know what Derrick Henry can do. I mean, come on. I mean, he just absolutely baptized Josh Norman. And we know about that because we're fans of Shizzle Adonis. We've been reminded. I think the Titans, even though they're playing on a short week, they have the benefit of playing at home. It's not like they have to make the flight down to Houston. They're not playing on the road. They're playing at home. They're playing a 1-4 Houston Texans team that, although they just beat Jacksonville and got their first win of the season, Jacksonville isn't that good, and they just fired their coach. And they're playing, I would argue, a top 5 coach in Mike Vrabel. I think he's to that level now. The way he's leading this Texans team to come off 2 weeks of not being able to practice, only having virtual Zoom meetings and virtual walkthroughs, and to come out and just demolish a really good team like the Buffalo Bills, oof. It's going to, I think Tennessee, even they're laying a decently big number, 5.5 point favorites. I think they're going to win by possibly 2 or 3 touchdowns. I'm sorry, Houston fans, but that's just the way it is. So, I'm picking Tennessee to cover the spread.
Yeah. Just Houston's team is just it's just not what it was a couple years ago. Like, they traded Clowney, they traded basically all their talent outside of J.J. Watt and Deshaun Watson, and now the talent that they have is aging, and it's just a mess. It's such
I don't want to.
Bill O'Brien left this organization.
I don't want to scare Titans fans.
But yeah.
Or Texans fans, excuse me. I don't want to scare you. But Derrick Henry, you're going against Derrick Henry, and you are the 31st ranked rush defense in the NFL, allowing 160 rushing yards per game. So fantasy owners, everyone out there that likes Derrick Henry, that has Derrick Henry on their fantasy team, like you mentioned, watch for a Derrick Henry 30-point plus game in terms of fantasy this week. Just because of the trends that are happening up to this point. But our next game, one of the games of the week, the Packers playing at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I guess I can go first on this one. I'm going to make this quick since we need to speed it up a little. I'm picking the Packers. They're 1.5 point favorites. I think they'll win and cover the spread on the road. I think they're the best team in the NFC. We talked about it earlier, the way Aaron Rodgers is playing. He's playing turnover-free, not playing careless football. He's playing at a very high level. Aaron Jones is obviously an important part of that team. He's been hurt a couple times. He's in and out of the lineup, but I think he's going to have a big game. I think they're going to be able to run the football effectively. I think Rodgers will continue to play mistake-free football. And, we're talking about a Packers offense that leads the NFL in points scored per game, and a Packers defense with those 2 edge rushers that can get to the quarterback, and the fact that Aaron Rodgers is very well protected, has one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. I don't think Tampa's pass rush will be able to get home. I'm picking the Packers to continue to be the best team in the NFC. They're going to beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by, I say, about 6 or 7 points on the road.
Right. I'm picking the Packers as well. I think the Packers are the team to beat in the NFC. With how the 49ers have played thus far this year, they're having that Super Bowl hangover, and then the Seahawks, their defense, it worries me. And then outside of that, you have the Saints, who have their own problems as well. They're struggling a little bit, and they're the most complete team in the NFC. I think they're the team to beat. And Aaron Rodgers, just looking at him, like, he's healthy now. Like, I think that collarbone injury, it took him a while to actually get his arm back feeling right. And if you look at his body language out there on the field, he's having fun again. He's not worried. He loves this team. And when you have Aaron Rodgers in good spirits and playing at this type of level, like a 2015 Aaron Rodgers level, like, the sky's the limit for this team. You could see them in the Super Bowl for sure.
I agree. Let's go ahead and quickly move on. Interesting divisional game here. You can argue that San Francisco is fighting for their season in this game.
Right.
We're talking about playing in one of the best divisions in football in the NFC West. And you're 2-3, and if you lose the fourth game, it's going to be an uphill battle to even get a wild card spot. And that's saying something with the expanded playoff format this year with 3 wild card teams instead of 2. So, but however, it's hard. This was a hard game for me to pick because they're both really well coached teams, even though it may not have showed last week for San Francisco. Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are 2 of the most clever coaches that we have today offensively in the NFL. San Francisco has been dealing with its fair share of injuries up to this point in the season, and that pass rush isn't quite the same given season-ending injuries to Bosa and all. But I think after you get embarrassed to a team like Miami, I think betting San Francisco to keep this game close. I'm not sure they'll win it, but I think betting San Francisco to keep this game close and cover the spread plus 3.5 underdogs, I think that's a good pick. They're a desperate team. They're gonna come out firing on all cylinders. Raheem Mostert and Jimmy Garoppolo are now on a full week with no injury setbacks. I think last week they were still not completely 100%. I think they're going to be able to establish a run game, use potentially the best player on the field in this game, offensive player on the field in this game in George Kittle, use some of the other receivers they've had coming back, like a Deebo Samuel. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is going to play better. I'm not picking the winner, but I do think San Francisco will cover the spread. I'm going to actually pick Los Angeles, the Rams, to win the game because they're currently the better team. But I think San Francisco will keep this game close, given that their season is on the line in this game.
I agree with you. And this game is so hard to pick. These teams, just the makeup of their teams, it's identical. You talk about 2 elite defensive lines, 2 strong running attacks, and then 2 meh quarterbacks. So, I mean, if you talk about just the matchup of the 49ers running game against that Rams front, I think that's what's going to decide. I think if the 49ers can't get that running game going with Jimmy Garoppolo being hobbled a little bit, I think this game could get away from them. I think ultimately they will be able to get the running game going, but I think I just don't think Jimmy Garoppolo will be able to make enough plays like on tough third downs to be able to win the game. I think that's what ultimately going to come down to. I think it'll be a defensive battle, which is weird to say because these are two really, really good offensive coaches. But I just think the defenses match up really well with each other.
All right, so with that, I agree. Let's move on. We're going to pick the 2 Monday night games. Now that with the whole COVID situation, now every week it seems like there's multiple Monday night games, which is good for football fans. More football, the better. And there's going to be more, I bet, Tuesday games in the near future, given the whole situation. But the first of which is Kansas City and Buffalo, 4 p.m. on Monday, an early game on Fox. I'll go first. Kansas City lost their first game in 14 games last Sunday, losing at home to the Raiders, an unexpected loss. But the Raiders are playing well. I think this is a game where they regroup under one of the best, a top 3 coach in the NFL, Andy Reid. I think they have the significant rest advantage. Buffalo's coming off a short week on the road and will have to travel, make the trip to Kansas City, which is not an easy place to play, even though there isn't fans in the stands. I think I'm going to lay the points, Kansas City minus 3.5 against a very good Buffalo team. If you were to ask me, I think you have to rank Buffalo top 4 team in the AFC and probably a top 8 team in the NFL for sure. But up to this point in the season, their defense isn't the typical Bills defenses. It isn't living up to that standard of years past. They actually are bottom 10 in the NFL in defensive efficiency, which is a surprise to many people when they hear that stat. And a lot of the players on that defense are banged up. So I think the Chiefs will regroup. I don't think you'll see Le'Veon Bell in this game, but I think the Chiefs are going to have a big game at home. Buffalo will probably keep it close up until some point late third quarter, early fourth quarter, and that's when I think Mahomes will take over. I think Kansas City will probably end up winning by about 2 field goals or a touchdown. What do you think?
I agree. Here's the thing. To beat Kansas City, you have to play a flawless game. Really, you have to. You have to play a flawless game. You got to be aggressive on 4th and shorts. You have to go for it because field goals won't help you against Patrick Mahomes. And if and when the Chiefs make a mistake, you have to take advantage. And I just don't think the Bills are equipped to do that this week. I think if they were to match up in the playoffs later, I think it would be an interesting matchup. But I think right now where their teams are at with the health that with the injuries that the Bills are dealing with, I think Kansas City, I think their defense is going to be motivated. They were just embarrassed by Oakland last week. I think they'll come out hot and they'll make plays. I think Kansas City will cover pretty easily.
I agree. And give credit to the Raiders. I mean, this is a team that has a winning record up to this point in the season. They have a budding star and Darren Fells, that tight end. Derek Carr has weapon. Darren Waller, excuse me. I'm thinking about the Darren Fells from Houston. Yeah, I mean, Derek Carr, give credit. I mean, he's a guy that gets a lot of criticism typically, but last week he probably played one of the best games of his career. Up to up until last week, he had terrible numbers when he played Kansas City, and he hadn't won a game in Kansas City in his career up until last week. So congratulations to him. John Gruden has that team playing well. I don't know if they'll make the playoffs. I don't know if their defense is good enough, but their offense is definitely talented, and they're a team to watch out for as a potential wild card sleeper because you never know what can happen, especially in these times. But with that,
I think.
Go ahead.
I think they. Yeah, wild card spot. Yeah.
But moving on, we'll finish off with your team, the Dallas Cowboys. So I'll give the floor to you to make your pick and say whatever you would like about this game and the Cowboys.
Well, before I talk about the game, I have to address the whole Dak Prescott situation. Prayers for Dak, man. I have been critical of him in the past, but I would never question him as a man. He's just he's a good guy. He's just all the stuff that he's done with mental health in the past year, and just what he's been through this year with his brother dying. I mean, and then having that happen, and then this happened within 7 months of each other. That's just devastating. I hope he comes back healthy. Okay, so to the game, Arizona and Dallas. I think Kyler Murray is a nightmare. I think the biggest thing is, can Dallas just get a decent pass rush from Kyler Murray? I think with Kyler Murray's height, if you get a decent pass rush up to him, just get in his face a little bit, then he's prone to make a little bit of mistakes. You saw in the Detroit game, Detroit was sending blitzes. Matt Patricia cooked up a really good scheme in that game, and he was able to pick off Kyler 2 or 3 times. So if Dallas has any chance in this game, they have to get just timely stops. Not even shut down. Just 1 or 2 here or there. But I don't think it will happen. I think Houston's offense. Why did I say Houston? I was thinking of DeAndre Hopkins when I said Houston. But Arizona's offense is just going to be too much to handle for this defense. I think Andy Dalton will play solid. He'll do what he can, but it's just we both know his track record in prime time. It's very similar to Kirk Cousins, to where he's just not quite able to get it done. And I think that trend will continue.
This is the first game where we disagree. And I'm not just being nice to you and to Dallas. But I do think that Dallas, according to CBS Sports, they're 2.5-point underdogs. Understandably so. You have a winning team against a losing team. That's typically the way it works. But I do think Dallas will cover the spread and win this game. When I look at the Cardinals, very talented offensively. Cliff Kingsbury has the team playing well, but they've played a relatively easy schedule up until this point. They beat a 49ers team who's struggling week 1. They beat a Washington team that is not very good with Dwayne Haskins. And then they beat the Jets, who are the worst team in the NFL. And when they play good teams like the Panthers, they put up fight, but they lost. I think the Cowboys, despite their record up to this point, given their 2-3 record, I think they're going to be able to win this game for a couple of reasons. The first of which, I think people are a little too high on Arizona because of what I just mentioned. The fact that they played a relatively easy schedule. And I'll admit, the same can be said about Pittsburgh. I mean, the teams they've played aren't great either. So the 4-0 record, you can say it, I'll admit it. And I think the same goes for Arizona. I think one of the things that's going to help Andy Dalton perform well in this game is the fact that, according to this, that Dallas offensive line won't have to block Chandler Jones, as he suffered an injury last week that will keep him out of this week's game. As I said, the Cardinals blew out the Jets last week, but everyone blows out the Jets. What does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
I think the Cowboys will be able to adjust to Prescott and Jones. I think they can still win 8 games and win this division. As surprising as that sounds, I think Andy Dalton is definitely a capable starter. He led Cincinnati, even though he wasn't able to win the playoff games. He did lead Cincinnati to 5, I believe, playoff appearances in a row in his time in Cincinnati. And if you look at his numbers, they're not as bad as you think. They're actually a little bit above average in terms of NFL starter. And with all the weapons that he has, at home, I'm going to lean towards Dallas in this one. Now, it does scare me. The offense, the Cardinals' offense, as talented as they are with Kyler Murray, adding in DeAndre Hopkins, Christian Kirk, Larry Fitzgerald, all the weapons they have, Chase Edmonds in the backfield. It does scare me a little bit with that Dallas defense. But I think they're going to be fired up and they're going to get this win for Dak Prescott and get their record back to 500. That might sound a little corny, but
here's another thing though. The defense just switched from a 4-3 to a 3-4, and they're still learning their scheme. So what I worry about is gap discipline, not just in the run game, but the pass game as well. When a guy like Kyler Murray, when you're rushing Kyler Murray, you have to stay in your lanes, or else he's just going to gash you. Especially a team like the Cowboys that likes to play a lot of man coverage. So I just wanted to add that in.
Last thing I'll say, I explained myself why I'm picking Dallas. Last thing I'll say though, again, I'll reiterate what you said. Definitely praying for Dak Prescott. I know his surgery went well. He's a well-respected guy. Just character, not only within the Cowboys organization, but just around the league and throughout the NFL fan base. I think everyone can say, regardless of what you think of him as a player, his character is top-notch. The way he carries himself in that locker room, the way he leads, the way he carries himself with the media, everything he has to do, carrying the weight that he carries, playing for a franchise like the Dallas Cowboys that is constantly in the spotlight, whether the team is playing well or not. I mean, given what he's gone through, losing his brother, having this injury, you have to hope and send your prayers to him and hope that he can come back even better next season. And I think Dallas should pay him, but that's a story for another day. But, I mean, the guy...
I think he's proven enough.
He's proven enough. He's won this division, 3 or 4 times? Even though it's not the best division, that's still not an easy thing to do in the NFL. Some quarterbacks never achieve that, regardless of where they play. So, very impressive. He's above average statistically. He wins a lot of games. It's just that elusive playoff run that's avoided him up to this point. So, prayers to Dak Prescott. But to wrap this up, because we have gone, an hour 20 minutes. My picks for this week, the Steelers -3.5 to beat the Browns, the Titans in a blowout of the Houston Texans, the Packers to beat Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and remain undefeated. The 49ers will keep it very close against the Rams, but will lose and fall to 2-4 with their season on the line. The Rams will improve to, I believe, 5-1. The Chiefs to rebound and beat the Bills, and the Cowboys to win a close game against the Arizona Cardinals at home on Monday night. But with that, if you don't have anything else to say, that's going to do it for episode 47 of the Raw Prospect Podcast. We will try to be back sooner than later to do another one of these as we find more time in our schedules to cover more NFL. And I know the NBA, free agency, and all that stuff, the draft is coming up in about a month, so we'll have to talk about that. But with that, it was nice to be here. For Imy Nixon and Michael Ween.
Like, subscribe.
Yep, like, subscribe.
Chanel.
Almost
We're
forgot.
Gang.
Yes. Yep.
And peace.
Peace out.